They said brilliance was enough, that a great idea, a revolutionary idea, could carve its own path through history. But John Pedersen learned the truth the hard way. Genius alone wasn't the key. Timing, politics, and fear of the unknown could suffocate even the most extraordinary invention. And his would become one of the greatest what-if weapons the world almost never knew. Before we begin his story, consider this question. How does something designed to win wars end up buried in a filing cabinet? How does a device capable of transforming an entire battlefield get pushed aside while the world marches toward conflict? What force is powerful enough to silence an invention the military desperately needed but refused to accept? Hold that question, because once you understand what happened to John Pedersen, you will never look at innovation the same way again. Imagine a weapon so ahead of its time that it threatened to rewrite the rules of combat. A device that could give soldiers unprecedented speed, accuracy, and survivability at a moment when the world was sliding toward chaos. Now imagine the creator spending nearly 20 years refining it, perfecting it, improving it, only to watch it get rejected not once, not twice, but repeatedly, each time for a reason more frustrating than the last. This is not just the story of a weapon. It is the story of a man trapped between his own brilliance and the system that could not understand him. A man forced to watch his dream slip away, while others, far less daring, shaped the future he thought he would define. And it all begins with a single promise: to give the soldier something better. Before we get into the story, drop a comment and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone around the world is tuning in from. And while you're there, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think, and make sure you never miss the stories that truly deserve to be remembered. John Pedersen was known as a quiet innovator, a thinker who preferred results over theatrics. He was not the kind of inventor who filled rooms with speeches or dazzled committees with grandstanding. Instead, he delivered solutions. During the early 20th century, when firearms technology was accelerating, he became one of the most trusted designers in America. And he earned that reputation by doing something few inventors could. He made complex ideas simple and practical. But his defining creation was not simple. In fact, it was bold, unconventional, and, depending on who saw it, either the future of warfare or a threat to everything the Army believed in. The Pedersen device. At first glance, it didn't look like much. A strange attachment, a small reconfiguration of parts, an idea you could hold in both hands. But what it allowed a standard rifle to do was nothing short of revolutionary. It converted a bolt-action M1903 Springfield rifle into a semi-automatic weapon capable of firing pistol-caliber cartridges at extraordinary speed. Soldiers could unleash rapid fire without losing accuracy, control, or stability. To understand why this mattered, imagine trench warfare. Imagine mud, smoke, close-range chaos, and the seconds that determined life or death. The Pedersen device was designed to give American soldiers overwhelming fire superiority in precisely those moments. It turned the infantryman into something new. A fast, adaptable, lethal force. The Army was stunned when they saw it. Military officers praised it. Committees approved it. Production began. Hundreds of thousands of units were ordered. The device was classified as top secret. Even its name was hidden behind misleading labels. It was so sensitive that soldiers who trained with it were sworn to silence. It seemed inevitable that Pedersen's invention would become a battlefield legend. But history is never that predictable. Before the Pedersen device could be deployed in World War I, the war ended. Overnight, the urgency evaporated. Suddenly, the Army was not desperate for innovation, it was desperate to save money. What was once seen as essential technology was now seen as an expensive curiosity. And though Pedersen argued that future conflicts would require exactly this kind of weapon, no one wanted to listen.
The device went from top secret to nearly forgotten. But Pedersen didn't stop. He believed deeply that the next war would expose the limits of bolt-action rifles. He was convinced that the United States needed semi-automatic weapons, and he dedicated himself entirely to producing the best one possible. This would lead to his next great project, the Pedersen rifle. Here is where the story intensifies. Here is where the anchors begin tightening around the narrative, pulling us toward the inevitable clash between innovation and resistance. For years, Pedersen worked on refining his new rifle. It wasn't just a variation of existing technology. It was an entirely different approach to ammunition. He designed a unique wax-coated cartridge that allowed the rifle to cycle smoothly. The mechanism was elegant, efficient, and years ahead of its competitors. The Army wanted a semi-automatic rifle. Pedersen wanted to give them the best one the world had ever seen. But while he was designing his masterpiece, another inventor was quietly working in a different direction: John Garand. Garand's rifle, the future M1, didn't rely on unusual ammunition or unconventional engineering. It was robust, straightforward, and easier for large-scale military adoption. It wasn't necessarily more inventive, but it was more compatible with the Army's existing mindset. And this is where Pedersen's fate was sealed. When the trials began, Pedersen's rifle impressed many evaluators. They acknowledged its sophistication and performance. But there was a problem, an anchor that dragged the entire project down. The Army was suspicious of the wax-coated cartridges. They worried about extreme temperatures, field contamination, long-term logistics, and the complexity of developing a supply chain for a completely new type of ammunition. In other words, they did not reject the brilliance of the weapon. They rejected the inconvenience of supporting it. Pedersen, who had dedicated his life to pushing the boundaries of firearms design, suddenly found himself fighting not against a competing weapon, but against institutional caution. The Army wanted innovation, but not too much innovation. They wanted progress, but not progress that required uncomfortable changes. When the final decision came, the Army selected Garand's design. Pedersen watched the announcement in silence. A lifetime of engineering brilliance, discarded in a moment. His rifle would never be standard issue. His device from World War I would soon be ordered destroyed to save storage space. Thousands of units were melted down, erased from history, removed so completely that few people even knew they had existed. But here is the anchor that keeps the audience glued. What if the Army made the wrong choice? What if Pedersen's vision was not just ahead of its time, but exactly what future conflicts required? What if his weapon, rejected for reasons unrelated to performance, could have changed everything? This question echoes through every discussion of military innovation. How many breakthroughs were lost because they were too unfamiliar? How many battles were shaped by decisions made not from strategy, but from hesitation? Pedersen was not the kind of man to publicly resent the outcome. He never launched attacks, never stirred controversy. But the quiet defeat weighed on him. For years, he had believed he could redefine infantry combat. Now he realized that innovation was not only a matter of engineering, it was a matter of persuasion, timing, and institutional psychology. He continued working, continued designing, continued chasing perfection, but the momentum had shifted. He was no longer the rising visionary of American weapons development. He was the man with the idea that didn't win. And yet, history has a way of circling back. Today, the Pedersen device is studied as one of the most fascinating and misunderstood inventions of its era. Military historians marvel at what it could have achieved. Firearms experts consider it a lost opportunity. And collectors now see surviving examples as priceless artifacts of an alternate technological path, a path that never had the chance to unfold.
As for the rifle, many modern experts point out how advanced it truly was. Its mechanism remains a topic of study, its ambition undeniable, and its rejection a reminder that good ideas need more than brilliance to succeed. John Pedersen stands as a symbol of a certain kind of innovator, the visionary who sees the future too early, the designer whose work is celebrated decades after it could have made the greatest difference, the man whose creations were born ready for the world, but met a world not ready for them. In the end, Pedersen's legacy is not defined by rejection. It is defined by potential, by the staggering possibility of what might have been, by the haunting idea that sometimes the most important inventions are the ones we never got to use. Make sure you're subscribed, because this channel goes deeper than the textbooks, further than the documentaries, and into the stories that were never meant to resurface. Here, forgotten inventions, silenced creators, and buried truths come back to life. And if you miss even one episode, you miss a piece of history that should have changed the world. Hit subscribe and stay with us, because what follows is something very few people have ever heard. And perhaps that is the final anchor, the thought that lingers long after the story ends. How many Pedersens still exist today? How many breakthroughs are we ignoring simply because they challenge the framework we're comfortable with? John Pedersen's weapon was rejected, but the lesson of his struggle endures, whispering to every generation that progress is fragile, vision is costly, and history is shaped not only by the inventions we embrace, but also by the ones we fail to understand. Yet the story does not truly end with the rejection of his weapon. That moment, painful as it was, became the turning point that reveals the most dramatic truth about Pedersen's life. He did not simply lose a competition. He lost to a system that wanted predictability more than excellence. And that system would later discover, in the harshest possible way, the cost of ignoring ideas that dared to challenge tradition. As the world moved into the 1930s, global tension grew louder. Nations rearmed, empires expanded, old alliances fractured. The coming conflict seemed increasingly inevitable, and military planners worldwide raced to modernize their forces. The United States, meanwhile, slowly and cautiously adopted the Garand rifle, believing it had finally embraced the future. But even as the M1 rifle became the pride of the infantry, whispers in the weapons community continued. Whispers of what Pedersen had made, what he could have made, what he still might be able to offer. Because Pedersen did not vanish after defeat. He continued designing, experimenting, refining new mechanisms. He believed that the next generation of weapons would require creative solutions, not predictable ones. His notebooks filled with ideas. His workshop became a place where rules dissolved and possibilities emerged. And though he had lost the official contest, he had not lost his ability to see what others overlooked. There is a kind of quiet heroism in what he did next. While others focused on perfecting known designs, Pedersen aimed to solve problems that militaries had not yet fully understood. He explored delayed blowback systems, lightweight weapons, new ammunition concepts, and alternative operating principles. His mind never rested. His imagination refused to accept the limitations the world had imposed on him. One of the great dramatic anchors of his life was the widening gap between what he envisioned and what institutions were prepared to accept. Pedersen was living in a world where armies adopted new weapons only when forced by necessity, and often long after innovators had offered better alternatives. It was a world where the future arrived slowly, dragging its feet, while creators like Pedersen sprinted ahead and waited for society to catch up. But history, as always, would find him again.
When World War II shattered the calm of the world, many military analysts revisited the innovations that had been ignored in the previous decades. Suddenly, mobility mattered more than ever. Fire superiority determined survival. Speed of fire, ease of control, adaptability, all of these qualities became priceless on the battlefield. And as these needs became urgent, some officials quietly regretted how hastily the Pedersen device had been discarded. They imagined what it could have done in the early years of the war, especially during chaotic infantry engagements. They imagined how many soldiers might have benefited from its capabilities. But imagining was all they could do. The device was gone. The decision had already been made. The opportunity had evaporated. For Pedersen, watching the world confront the very problems he had tried to solve was bittersweet. On one hand, he saw validation. On the other, he saw a painful reminder that innovation delayed is innovation denied. It does no good to be right if being right comes 20 years too early. Still, he kept working. If the world was finally catching up, he wanted to be ready. Even as he aged, he remained driven by the same belief that had guided him from the beginning, that weapons should evolve as fast as the threats they are meant to counter. He created new prototypes, consulted with manufacturers, and stayed deeply involved in the technical community. His presence continued to influence designers long after his name stopped appearing in the headlines. And this leads us to another anchor in his story, one often forgotten, the quiet revolution he inspired behind the scenes. Young engineers studying his mechanisms learned that there were always unconventional paths to solving mechanical challenges. Firearm designers recognized that elegance, precision, and efficiency were not luxuries, they were the foundation of great engineering. Many who would later shape post-war weapons development absorbed lessons from his thinking, even if they never held one of his rifles or devices. Pedersen's innovations, though rejected, did not disappear. They dissolved into the bloodstream of firearms technology. They influenced other designs, unlocked new approaches, and encouraged a generation of engineers to challenge assumptions rather than surrender to them. This is the hidden victory of his story. The power of an idea extends far beyond the moment it is accepted or rejected. Even a discarded invention can leave fingerprints on the future. Even a forgotten weapon can spark inspiration decades later. Yet, for all the influence he quietly exerted, Pedersen's personal life remained marked by a sense of unfinished purpose. Just as artists feared dying before completing their masterpiece, Pedersen feared leaving behind a world that would never truly understand what he had tried to give it. He knew that many of his designs were ahead of their time. He knew that some would be rediscovered long after he was gone. But he also knew that history rarely rewards those whose breakthroughs come too early. And this is where his story becomes more universal. It is no longer just the tale of a weapon that was rejected. It is the tale of anyone whose work challenges the comfort of convention. Anyone whose ideas emerge before society is ready to embrace them. Anyone who watches the world struggle with problems they already solved but never had the chance to implement. There is a haunting humanity in this, a sense that Pedersen's struggle mirrors a timeless truth. Innovation is not simply the creation of something new. It is the battle to convince others that the new thing deserves to exist. As the war ended and the world rebuilt itself, Pedersen slowly stepped out of the spotlight. Younger engineers carried the torch now, armed with the principles he had championed for decades. The firearms industry evolved rapidly, and many of the advancements that became standard in later generations echoed ideas Pedersen had attempted long before. His name faded from common conversation, but among those who understood the history of weapon development, it became a symbol of what might have been, a symbol of the dangers of institutional caution, a symbol of brilliance unmatched by opportunity.
The few surviving Pedersen devices, hidden away in museums or private collections, became relics not of war, but of possibility. People looked at them and wondered how different the world might have been if they had reached the battlefield in 1919. They examined his rifle prototypes and marveled at their sophistication, asking why such vision had been allowed to slip through history's fingers. And perhaps the most compelling question of all is the one that lingers every time his story is told. How many more John Pedersens exist today? Creators whose ideas could change everything if only someone listened. His life is a reminder that the rejection of a weapon is never just about the weapon. It is about the system that rejected it, the fears that guided the decision, the opportunities lost because comfort outweighed courage. John Pedersen died knowing that his greatest achievements were misunderstood, his finest work undervalued, his most ambitious ideas untested. But he also died knowing that the people capable of recognizing true innovation had always admired him. Engineers still study his designs. Historians still debate the decisions that sidelined him. Enthusiasts still speak his name with reverence. Invention is a gamble. Some ideas change the world instantly. Some wait decades to be rediscovered. And some remain forever in the realm of what could have been. Pedersen's creations belong to all three categories at once, which is what makes his legacy so unsettling and so powerful. The world did not give him the battlefield he deserved, nor the recognition he earned, but history has reclaimed him. His work, once dismissed, is now celebrated for its ingenuity. His failures are studied not as personal shortcomings, but as institutional missteps. His story serves as a warning to every generation. Dismiss innovation too quickly, and you may bury the future before it has the chance to live. And perhaps that is the final truth of John Pedersen. He was not simply an inventor. He was a preview of the future. A future the world was too slow to embrace. A future we can still learn from, if we are wise enough to listen. And so we arrive at the final chapter of a story that never truly ended, a story suspended between triumph and tragedy, between what was achieved and what was denied. John Pedersen's life, viewed from a distance, resembles a line drawn with extraordinary precision, only for the world to step in midway and tug that line off course. Yet even when bent, even when interrupted, the line did not break. His ideas carried forward, not in the form he intended, not with the recognition he deserved, but with a quiet persistence that outlived the institutions that once dismissed him. As the years passed and the world marched into a new era of technology, Pedersen watched from the sidelines as the principles he had advocated began appearing in modern weapons. Faster cycling rates, innovative ammunition concepts, streamlined mechanisms, lightweight materials. Features once dismissed as impractical or unnecessary slowly became standard. Engineers celebrated them as breakthroughs, unaware that decades earlier, one man had already walked this path, mapping the terrain in solitude, guided only by conviction and imagination.
Those who spoke with Pedersen in his later years often described an unusual calmness about him. It wasn't resignation, it wasn't bitterness, it was something deeper, something almost philosophical. He had come to understand a truth most inventors confront only reluctantly. Ideas live independently of their creators. Some bloom instantly, others take decades, some remain buried until rediscovered by another generation. But if an idea is strong enough, if it is built on insight rather than impulse, it survives. And in that survival, the inventor finds a different kind of victory. Yet beneath that calmness was an unspoken sadness that revealed itself only in brief flickers of expression, the kind of fleeting emotion one notices only by accident. Pedersen had poured himself into creating tools that would save lives, enhance soldiers' capabilities, and redefine combat. He believed in progress not as an abstract ideal, but as a responsibility. Every improvement, every refinement, every mechanism he designed was driven by a profound sense of duty. To him, innovation was not a luxury, it was an obligation.
But he also knew the cost of working ahead of his time. He knew what it felt like to watch the world walk away from an idea that could have reshaped its own future. He knew what it felt like to hold a device in his hands and realize no battlefield would ever witness what it could do. He knew the quiet heartbreak of imagining soldiers who might have lived had the right tools been chosen at the right moment. And though Pedersen never spoke these thoughts aloud, those close to him could sense that the rejection of his work carried a moral weight he never entirely put down. There is a moment often recalled by a colleague who visited him late in life. Pedersen had taken out one of his surviving prototypes, a rifle polished by decades of careful preservation. He set it on the table, rested his hands on it, and said softly, almost to himself, that people called it a failure. Then he smiled, a faint, knowing smile, and said that failure is a word the impatient use to describe something whose time has not yet come. The colleague never forgot that line. It captured the essence of Pedersen's spirit, resilient, hopeful, unwilling to measure his worth by the decisions of committees. As the decades rolled forward, historians began re-examining his work. What had once been dismissed as unnecessary complexity was now recognized as elegant engineering. What had been criticized as unconventional was now viewed as forward thinking. Younger generations of designers studied his mechanisms not with skepticism, but with admiration. They traced the lineage of modern firearms and found his fingerprints in places no one expected. Suddenly, the man who had been overshadowed in his prime began emerging as a visionary whose ideas had simply arrived too early.
And with that recognition came something Pedersen never experienced in life: vindication. But the emotional core of his story lies not in this belated acknowledgement. It lies in what his journey reveals about the fragile relationship between innovation and acceptance. His life forces us to confront a difficult truth. The world does not always reward brilliance. It does not always welcome change. Often it clings to what is familiar, even when the unfamiliar could save it. And when that happens, the cost is not merely the loss of an invention. The cost is the lost future that invention might have created. Pedersen's tale is a reminder that progress is not guaranteed. It must be chosen, fought for, defended. It requires courage not only from inventors, but from those with the power to approve or deny their ideas. The tragedy of his rejection is not only that his weapons were not adopted, but that so few people in authority were willing to imagine the world he envisioned. Yet the emotional power of his legacy lies in something greater than regret. It lies in the message his life offers to every person who dares to create. Pedersen teaches us that the measure of innovation is not the applause it receives, nor the speed with which it is embraced, but the truth it carries. A true idea, a profound idea, continues long after the world has looked away. It finds new voices. It finds new hands. It finds new relevance. In this way, Pedersen's story is far from tragic. It is a testament to endurance, an example of how a single mind can shape the future, even when the present refuses to acknowledge it. His work, though rejected in his lifetime, pushed boundaries that others would later cross. His mechanisms expanded the vocabulary of firearms engineering. His determination inspired generations of designers to question norms, to break conventions, to push the limits of what a weapon could be. And perhaps the most moving part of all is this. Even though his inventions never became icons of war, his story became an icon of possibility. People look at his life and feel something ignite inside them, a conviction that ideas matter, even when unseen, a belief that rejection does not diminish worth, a reminder that the world's reluctance is not a final verdict, but a temporary misunderstanding. When John Pedersen passed away, he left behind no victory parades, no medals for battlefield triumphs, no monuments erected in his honor. What he left instead was quieter, but infinitely more profound. The challenge to dream boldly, to build fearlessly, to continue even when the world hesitates.
Today, when historians open the files that once concealed the Pedersen device, when collectors handle the rare rifles crafted by his hands, when young engineers study the details of his designs, they do not see failure. They see determination. They see courage. They see a man who believed the future could be better than the past and who tried, against all resistance, to create that future with his own hands. And if there is a final emotion, a final resonance that lingers long after his story ends, it is this. John Pedersen's inventions may have been rejected, but his vision endures. His work continues to whisper to us across time, urging us not to fear new ideas, not to silence innovation, not to let caution overshadow possibility. Because somewhere, in every era, another John Pedersen is working in the shadows, building something the world is not yet ready to understand. And the question his story leaves us with is simple, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Will we recognize that brilliance when we see it? Or will we once again let the future slip through our fingers? If you made it this far, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps the story reach more people, and it tells me you want more deep, forgotten history just like this. Thanks for watching.